Good morning. I'm Helen Foss, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you as today's worship associate. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. Welcome to all of you who are here in person in the sanctuary this morning, and welcome to you all at home who are joining us online. Welcome to you all, no matter the hue of your skin or the origin of your ethnicity. Welcome whomever you love and wherever you are on your spiritual journey. You are welcome here. If you're new to First Unitarian, I invite you to check out our website. It's firstuuwilm.org to learn more about us and to sign up for our email newsletter that'll come to you every Friday in your inbox. I have an announcement this morning. It's week 2 of our month-long Counterpoint music fundraising drive. We kicked it off last week with a wonderful organ concert by Bruce Barber, and we will wrap it up with a very special thank you concert called Songs and Sundays with the First U Choir on Sunday, October 22nd at 2 p.m. It'll be a family-friendly concert featuring show tunes from Disney to Hamilton, and afterwards there will be an ice cream sundae bar. So mark your calendars for October 22nd, 2 p.m. If you have questions about the Counterpoint Fund or want more information about Songs and Sundays, the concert, stop in at the music table in the parish hall after the service. I was pleased to discover that Reverend Larry was going to talk this morning about aspects of our Unitarian Universalist history that I knew little about. Mutual engagement and mutual influence in our UU Christian ancestors that they had with Islam and Judaism early in our history. When I walked in these doors for a memorial service in 1966, I was a religious refugee. I had turned my back on the faith of my upbringing, and I knew, though, that first day that I had found a spiritual home. I at first was thrilled that I could happily sing all the words of the hymns and listen in the pews without squirming. Last Sunday, or 2 Sundays ago, in his stewardship moment, Ed Scott recounted his enthusiastic yes in response to each of the elements of the affirmation of our faith each Sunday. As I learned more about our principles and embraced our stances on social justice and grew exponentially with new ways to encounter spirituality, again and again, I could proclaim yes. I have learned a lot about Unitarian Universalism over these past 54 years since we became members and have applauded our work together. Now this morning, I'm happy to step back and learn more about our roots, that mutual engagement and influence with the 3 major faiths. So let us now, I look forward rather, to becoming enriched and even more appreciative of this faith of ours. And now, let us prepare our hearts and our minds for worship.
Peace, salam, shalom. 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 Peace,
Good morning. That was your wake-up call? Let's all do a big stretch to get more into this room. Great. Good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. And I want to add my welcome to Helen's welcome. And if you're a newcomer here, I want to make sure I meet you today and that we connect with you in some way. And if you're joining us online, you have also a way to connect with us on the link that you'll find in the chat. So today, as we reflect upon some of the early beginnings of our Unitarian story, may we seek to understand why it matters that our DNA includes these influences across faith communities. May this ever-deepening understanding of our own history root us in an affirmed commitment to be open, ever more open to the creative interplay between differences, to be curious about the possibilities that bloom at the borders, and to engage with one another across our imagined separateness. Let us join together now in worship.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me by lighting it, as Reverend Larry Reed lights ours here. Our words this morning are adapted from the words of a retired UU minister, Dillman Baker Sorrell. For holy days on which we recall the old stories, we light the flame. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom in the past, we light the flame. For Easter, which reminds us that love is our greatest challenge, we light the flame. For the month of Ramadan, which reminds us to offer forgiveness to others, strengthening our relationships, and cleanse our bodies and souls, we light the flame. For gathering together in this sacred space, we light the flame. For the opportunity to be together as a community, to remember the past, to plan for our future, and to be alive in our present, we light the flame. Please stand now as you are willing and able, and join in singing hymn number 400, Shalom Havirim. Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
I love sharing these words from a meditation written by a dear, dear colleague, Judy Wells, who some of us in this room know. I knew Judy just as she was entering ministry, and unfortunately, She left this world too soon, but she left behind a lot of admiration and light and love. O divine source of love, O divine source of love, we thank you for the countless ways you make yourself known to us. O deep lap, we feel supported by your firm strength under us. Yielding yet solid, you are utterly reliable. You will never let us down. O blurred composition of pink and lavender leaf patterns, O all-embracing arms, you hold us warmly against your comforting self. In the rhythmic cycles of your body, we feel the steady heartbeat of everlasting life. Oh, sweet breath, you lift our hair and caress our skin. Yours is the breath of kindness. You dry our tears. You whisper solace in the night. Oh, beautiful, familiar face. Your loveliness is constant, though your expression changes with climate, age, and season. Were we to sleep for 1,000 years and awake in an unknown place still, we would know that we are at home in you. Praise and thanks to you, divine source of comfort, of pleasure, of knowledge, and of peace. May we always remember, with every breath and gesture, that we are loved. We are loved. We are loved. Spirit of that meditation, now let us share some silence with one another. So each week when we gather, we take a time within our service to attend to whatever concerns or joys we may be holding in our own heart. And so let's begin this time this morning with paying attention and listening to your own heart. What is it that you are holding there? What concerns may be weighing you down? What joys might be lifting you up? So let's take a moment to attend to our heart, and then in a moment, I'll invite those who want to share to do so. So, what are the concerns that you are holding in your heart for yourself, for someone you care about, or for our common world? If you choose to, you may speak them into this room or write them in the chat.
All Black Lives.
You need not hold these concerns alone. May you feel the presence of one another that supports you. May you feel a presence that upholds you, comforts you, and cares for you. What joys, maybe even joys that are just beginning to bubble up within you. What joys are you carrying into this room this day that you may choose to share with us? Oh, let's everybody speak at once. Let me hear if you say them again. Autumn.
That's good. Kathy Harris back Kathy's back.
Yes, and having Kathy back with us is a joy. Again, may we celebrate with one another and be upheld by others' joys as well. May all the names that were spoken and those that were unspoken find peace and healing this day.
Oh, there is always reflections of the mind. When I look to the heart, there is nothing but God. Oh, there is always reflections of the mind. But when I look to the heart, there is nothing but God. La ilaha illallah, 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 la ilaha illallah.
Our responsive reading this morning was composed by Universalist Olympia Brown, who is known as the first woman minister whose ordination in 1863 was recognized by a denomination. She spent a lifetime working for women's suffrage and was among the few original suffragists still alive to vote at long last in 1919. Please join me in this responsive reading. Your response as a congregation will appear on the screen. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it.
There is nothing in all the world so important as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before us the loftiest ideals,
which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us for noble duty, and made the world beautiful.
do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this great message.
That you are strong enough to work for a great true principle without counting the cost.
Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation, always trusting in the one God which ever lives and loves. Can you remember some of the field trips that you went on in school, in elementary or middle school or high school? Let me hear a few examples. Okay. Coca-Cola factory. Hershey. Okay, great. There's so many. I did a lot of those too. I went on trips of historical significance, museums, and sometimes even state parks or fun attractions. But since I went to Roman Catholic schools early in my life, we also had some variations on these typical field trips. For example, I recall us piling into a big yellow school bus and attending a movie together. Such thrilling cinematic features, such as the Song of Bernadette, which portrays the story of Bernadette, who reportedly experienced 18 visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Lourdes, France. The movie opens with a scene of the 14-year-old Bernadette being shamed by her teacher, Sister Valzou, for falling behind in her studies because of her asthma. That afternoon, while fetching firewood with her sister Marie and a friend, Bernadette begins to experience these appearances of a beautiful lady dressed in white, who it turns out is Mary, Blessed Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, as I look back on that story of that film, I realized that Bernadette did show old Sister Valzou her place. Touché! And there is a subtext in the movie that 3 children from poor families gained enormous power to bring the whole system of the church and society in disarray and subversiveness because of their reported visions and the fact that this beautiful lady in white would appear to them mere children. And of course, there was our field trip to see The Sound of Music, about a young postulate or a candidate for the women's religious life or a nun who isn't quite cutting it in the convent, and so they send her to be governess of 7 children of a retired naval officer. Now, if that wouldn't have her running back and getting back in shape to go to the convent, I don't know what would. So these movies and others were part of our field trips. I wonder now, given the restrictions that were placed on nuns back then, whether this was the only time those dear sisters got to go to a movie. You know, dragging dozens of snot-nosed, rambunctious children along with them. I wonder, I feel a little compassion for them now. Then there were the field trips that we went on in 5th grade, which had a different kind of slant to them. In the Roman Catholic school that I was attending, we were actually taken on field trips to other churches and a synagogue. I believe that our Catholic religious educators were trying to create bridges of understanding for us as a burgeoning ecumenical movement was being launched at the time that also saw more cooperation across denominations in the work for civil rights. As a 5th grader, I was intrigued These field trips with my Catholic school religious education class, because up until now, we'd been told we weren't allowed to visit non-Catholic churches. Anyone else had that experience as a child? Okay. So it was an adventure. It felt like an adventure to finally break through the island taboo. I recall that we visited what we called Protestant churches. That was the extent of our vocabulary at the time. And a Jewish temple. On the day we visited a Baptist church, I was immediately fascinated by what I observed in the front of the sanctuary. Oh, wow. Look, they have a swimming pool. Lawrence, said the nun, in a monotone voice as she stared through me and down at me with her laser beam eyes. I melted on the spot as my fascination turned into embarrassment. Obviously, I had said something wrong. And then the Baptist minister laughed out loud at my comment, and I felt instantly redeemed, or shall I say saved, on the spot. He appreciated, I believe, my looking at things with my fresh, naive eyes. And my embarrassment lifted, and I stood just a little taller in that moment. He went on to explain that in their church, when they baptized people, their whole body went into the water. We don't sprinkle, we dunk, he said. And he used this to explain to our class of fifth graders why they were called a Baptist church. I nodded with a strong confidence as my gaze fixated on that baptismal pool in front of me and away from the piercing eyes of the nun that I could feel. You know, it seems like that I've been continuing these field trips the rest of my life. They started in fifth grade, and they've continued ever since. So when I was a senior in high school, for example, I was in a social studies seminar class, and I developed a research project in which I interviewed all the different clergy in the town that we were living in. My attraction to Unitarian Universalism in late adolescence began as a field trip to a UU church. And because I felt that I could continue to explore, I didn't have to feel that my arrival in a UU church meant my exploring would have to cease. In fact, we do affirm in our purposes and principles the practice of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. In much of my national work, first on the staff of the Unitarian Universalists Association, and then with a few cross-denominational organizations, I often sought my counterpoints in other religious traditions and worked with not just UU congregations, but Jewish congregations and congregations of many Protestant denominations. I've taught in seminaries that had Christian and Jewish and Muslim students, students from black churches, progressive congregations, and conservative ones. So my field trips have continued in that religious terrain that is so rich and diverse. Now, over the years, I've also dragged my spouse to a variety of religious services in various religious traditions. I have been called a religious tourist. Even as I feel grounded in Unitarian Universalism, I still am drawn to understand and appreciate the various ways that people seek what is holy and express their yearnings and their longings for the holy connection and for the common good across all of our differences. In our culture, and particularly in the arena of religion, there's a tendency towards exclusionary thinking, in which we claim our viewpoint is right, and we exclude those who don't agree with us. Let's all try that movement. One. Sometimes we do it in much more subtle ways. I have personally benefited from the perspective of Ken Wilber, who takes an integral perspective, which recognizes that as persons and cultures and even religions, that we are often, as he says, transcending and including. In a nutshell, this might mean that instead of trying to pit one viewpoint against another, we aim to include the valid features of all viewpoints into the most inclusive model of which we can conceive. For Wilber, this process of transcending the limitations of one way of looking at things and including the partial truths that might be contained is what occurs in our own personal growth and our cultural development and the expansion, the expansion of our consciousness beyond the I'm right and you're wrong tendency so prevalent today. Now, if we took the time, I suspect each of us could trace some of this pattern of transcending former perspectives and including some of their particles of truth as we've grown in our own personal and spiritual lives. You suspect that's true? This same growth dynamic exists within Unitarian Universalism at its best as well. We incorporate into our spiritual lives what makes sense to us, and we know that we will, as we develop, also transcend some understandings as we grow and develop and mature to something new in our understanding. In spite of whatever exceptions might occur, I still want to declare that there's something in our spiritual DNA that propels us to keep a curious posture, to be open to diverse experiences, and to continue to deepen and to develop our understandings. Our workshop today after church, Diversity with Dogma, Without Dogma, with author Gil Cosby, who's here, I suspect will invite us into similar process of observing how when we acknowledge, understand, and learn from inevitable differences among us, that we can transcend the personal and interpersonal limitations that bind us. There's something about Unitarian Universalism at its best that invites us into this integral perspective. And what I discovered recently is when we look more fully into our family tree, that we have a richer story to tell about ourselves than we usually do. Depending upon when you entered into this faith community, you may have a certain understanding of who Unitarian Universalists are, a certain understanding of our history and of our heritage. And yet our roots go deep and our branches reach much wider than we usually acknowledge. The story that we usually tell about Unitarian Universalism is something like this. We teach about our New England roots, the pilgrims who risked everything for their own religious freedom, the Boston reformers and literati who advanced social reform, the 20th century religious humanists who reverenced science and worked for civil rights and call us to care for the world. Sound familiar? While all this is true, it's only part of our story. Such a story only captures part of our family tree and leaves out other parts of our family tree. I found this distinction in narrative therapy very useful. It's this distinction between a thin story and a thick story. So let me explain what I mean. In a thin story, we tend to select out events from our life, for example, to create a story that tells a neat, compact version of our events. A thin story can be one that's tragic or triumphant, or can oftentimes be limiting. I believe this typical story that we tell about our history as Unitarian Universalism is an example of a thin story. It selects certain things but leaves out so much else. It is a triumphant story about freedom and reason and tolerance. It fits well within our dominant narrative of who we of we are a coming out of people, we are leaving behind people, leaving behind traditional faiths or the faiths we were raised in, and we move towards ever more enlightenment and eloquence. Let me see your eloquence. You can do a little bit better. Let me see your eloquence. Great. I knew it was a true story. Yet when we broaden the events that we draw upon to tell the story about ourselves, when we venture to look into our broader Unitarian religious history in particular, we may thicken the story, which I believe can often enrich our understanding in ways that a thin story never can. So this is my aim this morning, to thicken our story so that we are drawing more on our family tree and our ancestry as a religious movement, as a way that provides a deeper understanding of who it is that we are. In broadening our story, thickening our story to our fuller family tree, I believe we're able to claim our religious identity in ways that are just ripe for this time, this moment in which we are in. In order to thicken our story, I've turned to some of the historical research from Unitarian Universalist historian Susan Ritchie in her book, Children of the Same God, The Historical Relationship Between Unitarianism, Judaism, and Islam. What Ritchie does is allow us to understand some of our Unitarian roots in Europe and recover some of our own defining characteristic as a religious movement that engages in multi-religious interchange and a broader sense of our heritage and our identity. We often think of ourselves as not being into theology that much, right? Right? In fact, a former professor at Harvard Divinity School still likes to tell a story when he was teaching a doctorate level course and invited students in the course to write a paper on their theology to undergird their research on a particular social ethics issue. He says a UU student immediately spoke up in a loud voice in the class and said, "Oh, I'm Unitarian Universalist. We don't do theology." It's a story that gets some laughs, and I also tend to cringe. I really tend to cringe when I've heard him tell this story more than once. I feel embarrassed by how we sometimes show up in the world in ways that actually belie our religious heritage and our religious practice. Obviously, we may not do theology in some of the conventional ways, yet we do reflect on the big questions about the nature of the holy, human nature, evil and suffering, and our role in healing and liberating the world. That is theology, my friend, when we're doing that kind of deep reflection. For a group that doesn't do theology, oddly enough, our name is one of the few, if not the only one, that uses a theological term to define ourselves, Unitarian and Universalist. I only have time this morning to focus on the Unitarian part. That name Unitarian was hard-won, and we should not carry it lightly or blithely. By calling ourselves Unitarian, we have distinguished ourselves in some of the theological debates and battles that have defined religious history in the West. As you may know, ready for a little history tour? Just say yes, thank you. As you may know, the first 3 centuries of Christianity, there were many ways of understanding Jesus, who he was, what the purpose of his work was, how human or how divine he was. And given all these various points of view among Christians, Emperor Constantine called together all the bishops of his empire together in 325 in the Common Era to stay in one of his nice palaces in Nicaea and to resolve once and for all by a vote who Jesus was. In fact, some think that the early church could have lived with this diversity of opinion for a long time if Constantine did not feel like he had to intervene. Constantine felt that in order to rule his kingdom and to make Christianity the state religion, he needed there to be consistency and agreement around what Christianity was. It was this Council of Nicaea in 325 in the Common Era that helped to move Christianity to what became known as the Trinity, an understanding that God the Father, God the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit were actually three persons in one triune God. Don't ask me to explain that. Trinitarian became the understanding of what God was, what God is. The Nicene Creed is still recited in some Christian churches today. Those who did not agree with this decision, who understood Jesus as a teacher and a prophet, as maybe of God, but not necessarily one being with the Father, including Bishop Arius, were considered at that point on heretics. Here's the thing. The definition of a Trinitarian God not only had theological implications, it also, as Ritchie points out, had implications for Christians' relationships with Jews at the time. From that point on, it could be construed that the Christian God, this triune God, and the Jewish God were not the same. Bishop Arius and others who were then considered anti-Trinitarian were considered heretics. Not only was this a theological issue, again, for many of them, it was also an issue of breaking their relationship and their bond with the Jewish community that they actually had at that time. Documents from this period also show that Constantine had some anti-Semitic motivation towards this unifying Christianity in this Trinitarian perspective. Now, fast forward to the 16th century. Aren't you glad we didn't do all the centuries in between? Ritchie points out in her research the issues of this division also becomes a relevant part of our own fuller history about ourselves, our fuller family history as Unitarians. Unitarian Christians, our ancestors in Europe, during that time, I quote, resisted establishing a Christian identity over and against Muslims and Jews, and instead fostered religious views and practices that expressed kinship and mutual respect among these three traditions. For them, it was more than a theological issue. It was breaking a sense of kinship and relationship with Muslims and Christians at that time by setting apart their God from the God of their neighbors. The most remarkable example of this cooperation and collaboration among Christians, Muslims, and Jews was during the 700-year period in Spain and North Africa when under Muslim rule, Christians, Muslims, and Jews coexisted in peaceful interaction that produced a splendid flowering of the arts, the architecture, music, and religious interchange and scholarship. This Andalusian period, that many of you may have heard of, is described fully in the book The Ornament of the World by Maria Rosa Menocal, which describes how Muslims, Jews, and Christians from the early 8th through the late 15th centuries managed, for the most part, with some interruptions, to sustain relationships that enabled them to coexist, collaborate, and to flourish. That is an inspiring story for us to tell in our time, I believe. Michael Servetus, a Spanish physician and theologian, became one of the key figures in Unitarian history in Europe, and he was aware of and influenced by this context in Spain when Jews, Muslims, and Christians learned each other's languages, read each other's scriptures, celebrated with one another. Servetus was anti-Trinitarian, better said as Unitarian, as were his Jewish and Muslim counterparts. All believed in one God, which they considered the same God. Following me so far? Okay. Servetus' motivation for taking on the Trinity was his concern that the doctrine unnecessarily separates Christianity from Judaism and Islam, And in his book, The Errors of the Trinity, he makes the case for why the doctrine of the Trinity is not in the Scriptures. He praises Muslims for accepting Jesus as a prophet and wonders why Christians cannot return the favor with Muhammad. It is Servetus's book that emboldened others to also loosen the grip that the doctrine of the Trinity had on other Christians at the time. So from Poland to Lithuania to Transylvania, anti-Trinitarian groups, Unitarian groups, arose to declare a Unitarian understanding of God, to honor the connection and the kinship they had in some cases with Jews and Muslims. In Transylvania, which is today part of Romania, yeah, it's the home of Dracula as well, and I've been there. And they actually have little tourist things to kind of see Dracula's castle if you're interested. But you can also see lots of Unitarian churches in the villages of Transylvania. Unitarians found a home there and a refuge for those who were being persecuted because of their Unitarian perspective in other parts of Europe. The historic Edict of Turda in 1568 granted religious toleration in Transylvania, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. And it was able to come about, Ritchie argues, because there was already a culture of Muslim toleration, a toleration of differing religious groups. And so it is the political and legal influence of the Ottoman Empire that prepared the way for the Edict of Turda, as much as the influence of Francis David, a Unitarian leader, and other radical reformers. So this non-Trinitarian theology of the Transylvanian Unitarians was viewed as corresponding exactly with the unity of God in the Quran and in the Jewish scriptures. In fact, some of our Unitarian ancestors in Transylvania adapted some of the Jewish customs in their own practices. So when we own this part of our history, we see that our story is much thicker and broader than the one we typically tell in the United States. This Unitarian heritage of cooperating and advocating for multi-religious understanding and cooperation is part of the story that we must tell about ourselves. Unitarians, in other words, preserved some of the cross-fertilization of ideas and some of the kinship with Jews and Muslims and Unitarian Christians at a time when some parts of Europe, Christians were persecuting, exiling, and diminishing not just the religions of Judaism and Islam, but also the people. So why does this matter? Because we need to claim our multi-religious characteristics that have formed and shaped who we are from our European heritage. Our DNA includes a solidarity with those of other faiths who might otherwise be persecuted and ostracized. More and more we are seeing Jewish and Muslims and progressive Christians who are feeling attracted to our Unitarian Universalist approach to religion. Rather than feeling they must drop their heritage, we may encourage them with the integrity that is actually part of our own fuller religious heritage to be part of our community. And interspirituality also means that we may find some practices that speak to our common humanity that come from other religious traditions. I know that when I was grieving the loss of my first spouse when I was 39 years old, I felt attracted to and comforted by some of the Jewish practices and rituals of mourning. I found them personally meaningful. There was something healing in these practices that counteract our culture's general tendency to get over grief quickly and efficiently. However, to acknowledge that you are mourning, to receive the company of others, to light a candle and be in the blessing of the memories of the one who has died. These transcend the particulars and include a common, universal human need. Since that time in my life, when I've been invited to join with Jewish friends who are also sitting in mourning, sitting Shiva. I understand the meaningfulness of this period of not having to be alone in your grief and of being held in the hearts of others into experiencing tangible care. As we confront global issues, it will require of us to do more and to collaborate more across religious communities, as we are already doing in many cases. It will require that we seek common ground and common cause with those who may have distinctly different religious beliefs and traditions than our own, and yet who are willing to join together to address the threats to democracy, the climate emergency, housing and immigration, hunger, racial injustice, and threats to women's health and LGBTQ rights. So as I conclude, I want to imagine that we are going on a field trip together. A field trip into the future of Unitarian Universalism. A Unitarian Universalism that claims a fuller story about itself. A story that includes the way that we may have overcome some of the limiting beliefs of the religion of our upbringing, and a story that tells of the importance of multi-religious interaction, kinship and cooperation of our ancestors, and solidarity with those who otherwise might be excluded or persecuted. Let's tell a thicker story as we move into our future. And if we sort of fast forward on that field trip 10 years from now, I'm wondering what you will see. I'm wondering what you will imagine. And I invite you to enter that imagination as we now hear our musical interlude together.
The stewardship moment today is going to be focused on UDAN. Longtime First U member Judy Gavadas is coming up to explain to us the work of UDAN, and then there will be a video following with John Claney explaining a new app, a new giving app. So take it away, Judy.
Wow. Thank you. Just thank you. And really, I had no idea what Reverend Larry was talking about this morning. So the fact that I'm here to tell you a thickening story. John is going to tell you how to give. And I have been asked to tell you why. Unlike many other denominations, temples, mosques, we come here to discover and love and live our Unitarian principles and practices. The short list that guides us, the inherent worth and dignity of every being, the interconnectedness of all life, the honest search for meaning and mercy. UUDAN helps us live these principles by turning them into practices. They educate us on national and local social justice issues, all the ones Larry just named. They facilitate coordination among all 5 of our congregations in Delaware, so we together are stronger. We are the people doing advocacy, testifying, postcarding, emailing, phoning, even snail mailing. But here's the problem, and it's a big problem. There are seemingly more dogmatists in the world than seekers, and the dogmatists have been at it for way more time than we have. An example from this past is the legislative session that ended in Delaware on June 30th. We Unitarians support HB 140, Delaware's medical aid in dying legislation, and have for the past 8 years. And this was the first year we got it out of the committee, the Health and Human Services Committee, and onto the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote. It was a huge victory. I was there when it came out of committee, and it's a really good other story. Ask me after the church service. And for the next month, we worked doggedly, not unlike the dogmatists, and between May and Friday, June 23rd, we got the 21 needed votes in the 40-person House. On Friday, we had the votes. But over the weekend, the dogmatists unleashed their dogs with phone calls and emails, warning the representatives that passing this bill would be a violation of God's will, as he, never of course she, is powerful in all matters of life and death. Sinners in the hands of an angry God is still a potent message. So, one of our 21 votes, fearing the wrath of God, withdrew his vote. In response, we withdrew the medical aid in dying bill, took it off the floor, because it's harder to bring back a dead bill, regardless of whether you're a seeker or a dogmatist. Seekers, that's us, we are strategic thinkers, so we withdrew the bill so we could carry on, so we can keep on carrying on and resurrect the bill in January. And in order to carry on, we need all of us, not just a few of us. We need to bring our time, our talent, and our treasure to carry on, to carry us out of the hands of angry gods and into the justice and mercy that is not so patiently waiting for us to act. Justice and mercy are waiting. Sign up, sign in, and pay up. I've been told not to tell you that all hell will break loose if you don't do it. So I won't. But here's what we've got. We got angry gods on this side, and we got justice and mercy on the other. And if we don't believe in angry gods with divine rights, we need to believe in each other. It's our choice. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Claney, AV Tech Lead here at First U. Right now I'm probably up in the AV booth having the awkward experience of watching me talk to you on the big screen in the sanctuary, or knowing that you're at home watching. If you've been to First U before, you're familiar with this moment in the service we call stewardship, and know that part of stewardship is the opportunity to contribute to the finances of the church. I'm here this morning to tell you about some new tools for electronic giving that will make the donation process easier. They're part of a new church management system that we're implementing called Church Center. If you want to find out more about Church Center in general, you can look at this week's e-news or search our website for Church Center. Right now, I'd like to talk about how this relates to Sunday morning stewardship. You can still give cash or checks in person or mail checks to the church office, but we have a new website for online giving and a new mobile app that supports giving on your phone. We've even added a text to give option for those of you that like the convenience of texting. Right now, I'm going to give you the connection info for all three and then show you each of them in some detail. Between the length of this video and the offertory music that follows, you'll have plenty of time to actually make a donation. So think about which method you want to try: text to give, website, or mobile app. All three options will work on any reasonably modern cell phone. The website is your only option for other devices like laptops or computers. If you're in the sanctuary, a cell phone is probably your only option, and if you don't have your cell phone and a method of payment with you, maybe you can help out your neighbor. For those of you at home, it depends on how you're watching this stream. If you're watching on your phone, maybe you could walk over to a computer or open your laptop to use the website. If you're watching on your computer, now would be a good time to go get your phone. Okay, here are the new instructions for the Sunday offering that we will display during the offertory music every Sunday. Note that it clearly indicates whether this is a typical Sunday morning offering or one of the Share the Plate offerings that we have once a month. Today happens to be a Share the Plate offering, so the instructions have one additional piece of information: the Share the Plate recipient. This slide will always have the text to give number, 84321, and the name of our app, Church Center. You'll need that if you want to download it from your phone's app store. It will also always show you the URL for the day's donation, in case a web browser is your preferred approach. Note that there's a QR code in the bottom left of your screen that will always take you to our website with the donation form filled out for the correct recipient. If you're not familiar with QR codes, mobile phone cameras can read them and turn them into a link on your phone's screen that you can tap with your finger. Some people like them because they can save you the trouble of typing a long website address into your mobile browser. If you've not already started trying one of these approaches, let's get started. For those of you that like texting, you can just text an amount to the number 84321. The first time you do this, you'll be asked to select your church. First, you provide your email address for receipts of your payments and add a method of payment, either a credit card or a bank account. I would show you that, but I've already set up text to give on my phone. But thereafter, you can just text an amount to the number 84321. It just takes a moment to get a text back confirming your donation. For today's Share the Plate, the recipient is Unitarian Universalists of Delaware Action Network. So, as you can see on the screen, to designate any recipient other than first you, text an amount followed by the keyword we create for each special recipient. In this case, the keyword is UUDAN. But wait, I already texted an amount without that keyword. No problem. Within a half hour of texting a donation, you can cancel your donation by texting the word refund. As you can see, my last donation has been refunded, so now I will try again and specify UUDAN. Remember that the number I'm texting to is 84321. I'm sending the amount followed by the keyword UUDAN. The $ is optional, and it does not matter whether the keyword is upper or lowercase. Okay, on to the website and the mobile app. They are very similar in function. On a mobile phone, the mobile app is just a little easier to read, and it supports notifications, which we will talk about more in the near future. To install the mobile app, Open your iPhone or Android App Store and search for Church Center. And then install it. When you first open Church Center, it's going to tell you that you need to identify your church. You can do that by using your location or just searching and typing in First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. I'm actually not right near church, but I bet I'll still be able to find it using my location. And sure enough, there are a bunch of churches right nearby, but First U is one of them. And then I confirm this is my church. So if the app sounds like the way to go, I encourage you to follow through with that now while I go on to talk about the website. As I've already mentioned, you can see the URL for today's Share the Plate on your screen, firstu.churchcenter.com/giving/to/uudan. This is also the link that you'll get to if you use this QR code. I don't want to type all that into my phone's web browser, so I'm going to use this code. If you're not already trying Text to Give or the Church Center app, please try this along with me. So here I am scanning the QR code with my phone's camera app. It pops up with a link that I can tap with my finger. So unless you've already logged into Church Center and are still logged in, this is going to most likely come to a login screen. One thing that's nice about Church Center is that you don't have to mess with usernames and passwords. You just give it your cell number and it will send a 6-digit code that you can enter to get in. Thereafter, you'll stay logged in until you log out or have not opened Church Center on that device for 2 weeks. You can also choose to send the code to your email instead of a phone number. Church Center works with email just as well as any application that sends verification to email. We've just noticed that using the cell phone is a little faster and more foolproof. Some email companies take a while to deliver email, and you don't want to close Church Center in your browser or app in order to open your email program, because when you open Church Center again, you'll need to start over and send a new code. So I'm going to send the code to my cell number. And enter it. I enter the code, and now I'm on the donation screen where I can enter the amount I want to donate. Notice that the recipient, UUDAN, has been selected for you. Click the down arrow to see other recipients you can select. I won't go through them all, but I want to point out that you can make payments towards your pledge on this giving page as well. Of course, Sundays are for donations over and above church operating expenses, allowing us to help others. So be sure to set it back to today's Share the Plate, UUDAN. If this is the first time you've donated, you will need to add a method of payment, either a credit card or a bank number. At some point, we may also add options like Apple Pay. Select your preferred method of payment. Decide whether you want to cover the processing fees that credit card companies charge us. Also, you can choose the frequency. Is this a one-time payment or a recurring payment? And if it is a recurring payment, what's the payment frequency? Weekly, every other week, monthly, twice monthly? That's if you get paid, say, twice a month, you could pick a date that would correspond with your payment schedule. So maybe the 1st and the 15th, or the 6th and the 20th, the 11th and the 25th. But I'm going to just make this a one-time payment. And then I can click Give Now to complete my payment. And there you have it. As you can see, we have multiple ways to give, and they're all pretty simple. We have Text to Give, the Church Center app, and the website. If you have any questions, please feel free to call the church office or email me, john@firstuuwilm.org. And now let's return to our service.
Please join me now in dedicating our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives in these, our offerings. Thank you, Pam and Kathy. If you've lit a chalice at home, I invite you to extinguish it now as I read these words by retired UU minister Rolf Gerhardt. We extinguish this flame, a mere wisp of matter in the process, almost as insubstantial as the thought of it. Yet our civilization has harnessed the power of such a flame to drive and shape a new world. So may it be, so may it be with the power of our thoughts that in truth and love they may drive and shape a new world.
So following the benediction, we will sing our song, which is from 145, When Tranquil Streams Will Meet and Merge, is the first line, something like that. Kate, could you stand up? Kate, what color is she wearing? So, Kate, it's like a magic cape for Kate. On upcoming Sundays, we're inviting any of you who are newcomers to find the person in the yellow cape to talk to about our congregation. If no one else approaches you, there's always the reliable, bright yellow cape person to go to. Okay, thank you, Kate. Okay, next Sunday is our second Sunday Share a Snack. Say that after me. Second Sunday, share a snack. Now say it again 3 times. Great. So we're going to have you bring the snacks on the second Sunday in case you didn't get the message there. And we'll have a theme each Sunday because we're focusing on heritage this month and our soul matters. We ask you to bring a snack that represents your heritages or heritage, okay, whatever that might be. So Italian, biscotti. Irish too, okay. So bring a snack and we'll have that opportunity to create a time of fellowship together. For those of you who are attending the workshop after the service, we'll have a table set up for those of you who ordered some soup, and we'll have that available for you, and the workshop will be in the parish hall. Now let's conclude our service.
We
Thank you.